I'm writing this with my hands still shaking because yesterday I watched my entire year of work, my life-changing $100,000 commission, vanish into thin air. My boss didn't just take it, he pocketed it, smiled like nothing happened, and then had the nerve to tell HR I was no longer a cultural fit. If you've ever had someone rip away something you earned, you know the kind of burn that settles in your chest. And if you don't, well, buckle up, because this story is going to show you exactly how it feels. If this hits you in the gut, stick around, and maybe drop a like or follow. It helps more than you know. The deal was the biggest of my career. I work in enterprise sales, the kind of long-haul contracts where you spend months eating stale sandwiches in airport lounges, memorizing a client's kid's soccer schedule, and learning their internal politics better than they know them themselves. This wasn't some $5,000 win. This was a monster, a deal that would secure the company's quarterly numbers, and, if you ask me, should have bought me a down payment on a house. For once, it felt like all the sleepless nights and cross-country flights were going to mean something. For 6 months, I'd lived out of a carry-on suitcase chasing this account. 3 continents in 10 weeks. I memorized procurement policies that read like medieval scrolls. I dealt with a client CFO who changed his mind every 24 hours. I jumped through flaming hoops that should have been labeled impossible, and I still landed the damn deal. When the ink dried, I should have been staring at a commission check with 6 figures. Instead, what I got was silence. At first, I thought it was a delay. Finance is slow, right? Payroll gets backed up. Maybe the system just needed a week. But then my calendar invites for client check-ins started disappearing. My access to project folders suddenly expired. HR pinged me for a quick touch base, and when I logged into our CRM, my name was gone from the deal record. Just like that. The account I had practically bled for was showing my boss's name. I confronted him. I walked straight into his office, still running on 2 hours of sleep from my last flight, and asked, "What happened to the commission on the Zenith account?" He didn't blink. Didn't even look guilty. Just leaned back, smirked, and said, "Those deals get split differently at this level. Don't worry about it. Focus on your pipeline." Split? That's not how our policy works. I knew it. He knew it. Every rep in the company knew it. But when someone with a corner office and an ego the size of Manhattan says it, you're supposed to shut up. And if you don't, well, HR suddenly finds you difficult. That's exactly what happened next. HR scheduled a meeting for me at 4 p.m. on a Friday. Classic quiet firing move. The email was full of those polite landmines. Just a conversation, alignment on values, clarify expectations. Anyone who's been through corporate politics knows what that means. By the time I sat in that bland, windowless room with 2 HR reps and a witness I'd never met, I realized the plan. They were going to strip me of the commission, pin me with some vague performance concern, and push me out before I could fight back. Clean, quiet, no lawsuit, no headlines. But what they didn't know was this. I had receipts. Every flight, every meeting, every late-night call with the client logged in my calendar, every email chain with the CFO where I'd untangled their red tape. Hell, I even had Teams recordings showing my boss trying to insert himself into conversations he hadn't attended. I didn't just close that deal. I documented every damn step of it. So as HR politely slid a mutual separation packet across the table, my mind wasn't on survival. It was on payback, because if my boss thought he could quietly steal $100,000 from me and bury me on the way out, he was about to learn just how loud I could be. If part 1 was about the shock, this is where the knife turns, because stealing $100,000 from me wasn't just a clerical error. It was calculated, precise, surgical. The first sign was in the CRM. Anyone in sales knows if it's not in the system, it doesn't exist. Every call, every meeting, every signed contract lives there. And on Monday morning, when I logged in to pull the final contract note for Zenith, my stomach dropped. My name, the only name that had been attached to that deal for half a year, was gone. In its place, my bosses. I thought maybe it was a glitch. CRMs can be messy, and I've seen stranger bugs. But then I opened the audit log. That's the digital fingerprint trail, the place you go to see who touched what and when. It should have shown my entries, my updates, my dozens of notes. Instead, the log looked washed, entries missing, dates resequenced, like someone had run a mop across the database and left it shiny enough to blind anyone who didn't know where to look. Except one thing didn't add up. I had exported the pipeline the week before as a CSV file for my personal tracking, and in that export, clear as daylight, the Zenith deal was under my name, complete with timestamps, last touch notes, and client responses. In other words, proof. But the commission dashboard told a different story. It showed deal owner, boss's name, and a payout labeled pending executive bonus. Not sales commission, executive bonus. That meant finance had already rerouted the money before I even saw it hit. The second sign came in email. Our finance department usually sends a commission confirmation slip within 2 business days of a deal's closure. It's basically a receipt for sales reps. Here's what you earned. Here's when you'll be paid. I never got mine. When I followed up with finance, I got a vague reply. According to our records, this deal was reassigned at the executive level. No explanation, no paperwork, just executive level. I couldn't ignore the timing either. A week before the deal closed, my boss had been unusually interested in my client calls. Normally, he couldn't care less about the technical grind. But suddenly he was hovering in conference rooms, asking, "So, what's the temperature over at Zenith? And do you think procurement's leaning green yet?" At the time, I thought maybe he was just showing interest. Now I knew better. He was laying the groundwork to swoop in at the finish line. And then came the weirdest part. An internal message popped up from our analytics lead, a guy I trusted. It was short, almost too short. "Hey, check the last 2 edits on Zenith. Doesn't look right." He never messaged me like that. I opened the activity log again and noticed something bizarre. The last user ID to modify the deal wasn't my boss's. It was an analyst's account, except the timestamp was at 11:42 p.m. on a Sunday. That analyst didn't work weekends, and anyone with eyes could see those edits weren't his. That's when it hit me. My boss hadn't just reassigned the deal. He'd pressured someone in analytics, or worse, used their login, to make it look like the data transfer was routine. That way, if anyone asked questions, it would look like a harmless system update, not corporate theft. The cherry on top? An email from my boss popped up in my inbox 2 days later. It was short, cold, almost mocking. "Make sure your other deals are moving. Don't get stuck on one client. Pipeline health is everything. No mention of Zenith. No congrats. Just a pat on the head, like I was some rookie who needed to keep grinding while he cashed my commission." I didn't reply, because by then I knew this wasn't just about money. It was about power, about silencing me before I could even raise my voice, about teaching me and everyone else what happens when you think the system will protect you instead of the guy in the corner office. And I also knew this. Every crime leaves fingerprints, even white-collar ones, especially when someone arrogant enough to steal 6 figures thinks he's too smart to get caught. So I started quietly building a case. I kept my mouth shut, smiled in meetings, and acted like nothing was wrong. But behind the scenes, I was archiving emails, pulling exports, and screenshotting everything I could. Every discrepancy, every missing log, every email with a timestamp that didn't match. I wasn't just fighting for $100,000 anymore. I was fighting for my career. Because if they thought they could rob me in plain sight and then show me the door without anyone ever knowing, they had no idea who they were dealing with. If part 2 showed me how the money vanished, part 3 is where I realized they wanted me gone. Not loudly, not with a scandal. Quietly, like I'd never been there. It started with little cuts. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. First, the meetings. My recurring check-ins with the Zenith client, meetings I'd run for 6 months straight, suddenly disappeared from my calendar. No cancellation notice, no explanation, just gone. I asked the client if they'd moved them, and they replied, "We assumed you were no longer leading the account." That single sentence hit me like a punch. I hadn't told them that. Nobody had. Which meant someone inside had quietly introduced a new narrative. Then came the emails. Normally, I'd be CC'd on every thread about deployment timelines, technical adjustments, onboarding issues, everything. But now, silence. I'd catch wind of an important update only when a confused client forwarded me an email chain asking, "Did you see this?" I hadn't, because someone had cut me out, and in the background something even uglier was happening. I found out HR was documenting me. How? Because one of the analysts slipped me a screenshot of a performance note in our HRIS system dated 3 months earlier, a meeting that never happened. The note said I'd been late to multiple client calls and missed internal deadlines. Neither was true, but there it was, sitting in my record like a trap waiting to be sprung. That's when I understood. This wasn't about performance. It was about building a case. They were laying a paper trail brick by brick, so when the axe finally fell, it would look like I'd been a problem all along. It was classic quiet firing. HR doesn't storm into your office and say, "We're done here." They make you uncomfortable. They cut off your access. They plant seeds of doubt. They isolate you until you either quit on your own or sign the separation papers without a fight. The thing is, none of it matched reality. My KPIs were solid. My close rate was above target. I had 3 more deals in pipeline worth millions in ARR. But none of that mattered, because someone higher up had decided the story. I was expendable. I'll never forget the Friday it crystallized. I got an email from HR at 3:30 p.m. Subject line, "Quick sync." Body: "We'd love to align on expectations and clarify next steps. Please meet us in conference room 2 at 4 LA. If you've ever worked in corporate America, you know that tone. Polite words with teeth behind them. A meeting at 4 on a Friday isn't about alignment. It's about paperwork. I sat in that bland beige room under buzzing fluorescent lights while 2 HR reps and some random witness I'd never met slid a folder across the table. Inside, a mutual separation agreement, a tidy little package with an NDA clause, a non-disparagement clause, and, most insulting of all, a line that said I waived any future claims to pending commissions. That was it. The plan wasn't just to take my $100,000. It was to erase me entirely, to push me out so quietly no one would ask questions, to make me sign away the right to fight back. I didn't sign. Instead, I leaned back, smiled just enough to unnerve them, and said, "Can I get a printed copy of our commission policy for my records?" Their faces froze. HR doesn't like when you ask for policies in writing. It means you know your rights. I left that room with nothing signed, but I wasn't walking out empty-handed, because in that moment I made a decision. If they wanted a quiet exit, they were about to get the loudest storm this company had ever seen. So that weekend, while my boss probably toasted himself over my stolen commission, I was at my kitchen table with 3 monitors open, building a digital war chest, screenshots of CRM exports, copies of the client's thank you emails, a timeline of every flight, every meeting, every deal note I'd logged, even the Teams recordings where my boss awkwardly tried to insert himself into calls he never attended. Every cut they made, I stitched back into a record, and by the end of Sunday night, I wasn't just some sales rep fighting for a paycheck. I was holding a loaded file that could detonate an entire executive's career. And the best part? They had no idea what was coming. If part 3 was the setup, part 4 was the attempted execution. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted me gone quietly, with my mouth shut, my records buried, and my $100,000 safely in my boss's pocket. The Monday after that Friday alignment ambush, I got a calendar invite titled Friendly Transition Conversation. That was the exact wording. Friendly. Transition. As if I was supposed to walk in, hug it out, and disappear like an unpaid intern. The room they booked wasn't HR's usual sterile conference box. It was smaller, more private, with a fake potted plant in the corner and a round table meant to feel less intimidating. My boss was already there, leaning back in his chair with that smug half-smile, like a man who thinks he's 3 moves ahead. HR was beside him, folder ready. He opened with, "Look, I don't want this to get messy. You're talented, but sometimes things just don't align culturally. If we handle this right, you leave with dignity, we all shake hands, and no one has to get lawyers involved." Translation: sign this paper, don't ask questions, and walk away from the money. The folder they slid across the table was thicker this time. Inside, a mutual separation agreement, an NDA with enough legal jargon to choke an elephant. A non-disparagement clause so airtight I wouldn't have been able to tell my own mother what happened. And, front and center, a waiver explicitly stating I forfeited any claims to pending or disputed commissions. I didn't touch the pen. Instead, I asked casually, "Can you clarify where in our commission policy it says an executive can reassign ownership after a contract is signed?" My boss blinked. HR shifted in her chair, and for the first time since this started, I saw something I hadn't seen before, a flicker of uncertainty. "Policies evolve," my boss said, waving a hand. "It's about business needs." "Cool," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Then I'll need a copy of the most recent policy in writing, signed and dated by compliance." That landed like a brick in water. HR froze. My boss's smile thinned. They weren't expecting me to know the rules well enough to ask for the actual document. I walked out without signing a single page, and by the time they realized their little friendly exit hadn't worked, I was already at my desk firing off 3 emails. 1, to compliance, attaching my exported pipeline file showing the deal under my name, with timestamps, plus a screenshot of the CRM before and after edits. Subject line: urgent, deal ownership discrepancy. 2, to the Compensation Committee, attaching the official policy from 6 months ago. Yes, I had a copy saved. Highlighting the section that explicitly prohibits post-signature reassignment. Subject line: violation of commission policy, immediate review requested. 3, to a corporate attorney I knew by reputation, not friendship. Just a brief inquiry, attaching the NDA draft and asking, "Is this enforceable?" Within an hour, compliance replied, short, nervous. "Thank you for raising this. We are reviewing." That's legal speak, for we weren't supposed to see this, but now we can't unsee it. The Compensation Committee didn't reply that day, but I saw the calendar. A closed-door session got added for Thursday. That was my first confirmation that the storm was building above my boss's head. And the lawyer, he called me after hours. "This NDA is trash," he said flatly. "It wouldn't hold in arbitration, let alone court. Don't sign anything, not 1 page." That weekend, while HR thought I was sweating bullets, I was calmly building my war chest. Every piece of evidence went into a cloud folder with a simple name: insurance. I labeled subfolders emails, CRM logs, policy docs, and client statements. I wasn't just protecting myself, I was loading a shotgun. And here's the kicker: I didn't keep it secret. Monday morning, I BCC'd myself on every client correspondence, copied my personal drive on every exported log, and made damn sure the metadata showed when those files were saved. If they tried to delete, overwrite, or correct the records, it would be obvious. By the end of the week, I wasn't the one trapped in a corner. They were, because now every move they made left them exposed to compliance, to legal, and worst of all, to the clients who trusted me more than they trusted them. And I was just getting started. If part 4 was me loading the shotgun, part 5 was when I finally cocked it. Because once the client spoke, there was no more pretending, no more cultural misalignment, no more executive-level reassignment, just cold, undeniable truth. It started with a single email. I'd CC'd myself on everything related to Zenith, but I hadn't reached out directly. I wanted to avoid dragging the client into my war, at least until I had no choice. But then, out of the blue, their CFO emailed me directly. Hey, just wanted to say thanks again for your leadership through this process. We know you carried this across the finish line. Let us know if there's anything else you need from us before the transition. Read that again. Your leadership. You carried this. That wasn't just a thank you. That was a smoking gun, I replied carefully. Neutral. Professional. Appreciate the kind words. If possible, could you please confirm in writing who your primary point of contact was throughout the negotiation, just for my internal records. 10 minutes later, I had it. A clean client-signed email stating I was their main contact from day one. They even attached a PDF of the signed contract, with my name listed in the correspondence trail. That alone would have been enough to put cracks in the wall. But then something even better happened. A junior project manager on the client side reached out casually. Hey, weird question. Why did your boss email us last week claiming he'd been running the deal? We've literally never spoken to him. I swear I almost laughed out loud. The arrogance, the stupidity. My boss couldn't resist trying to rewrite the narrative, and in doing so, he'd walk straight into a buzzsaw. The client forwarded me the email chain, him posturing about our partnership, and my vision for the account. Except the dates didn't match. He was inserting himself after the fact, and everyone could see it. By midweek, compliance had already escalated. I knew because I got a ping from an internal investigator asking for a timeline of events. I gave them one. Not emotional, not angry, just facts with attachments. Every log, every email, every export neatly labeled. Meanwhile, HR tried to pretend nothing was happening. They sent me generic checking-in emails with corporate fluff, like, "We value your contributions." But the cracks were showing. In one email, they accidentally left, in a track-to-change comment, "Need to align with boss's name before sending." They were scrambling, and then came the real explosion. One of our analysts, remember the guy whose account was mysteriously used to alter the CRM, finally snapped. He called me after hours, voice shaking. "Look, I didn't touch your deal, I swear. Boss's name pressured me to help clean up attribution. He said it was just housekeeping. I didn't realize he was stealing your commission until I saw compliance asking questions. I can't get dragged into this." That was it, the first domino, the moment someone inside admitted the truth. The next morning, the Zenith client sent a bombshell of their own, a formal letter to our VP of Sales, praising me by name and demanding I remain their point of contact. That letter hit inboxes across the executive floor like a grenade. You could almost feel the panic ripple through the building. By Thursday, the compensation committee had frozen the payout on Zenith. My boss's executive bonus was suddenly marked on hold pending review. He stormed past my desk that afternoon, red in the face, pretending not to look at me. I didn't say a word, but the best moment came Friday morning when compliance requested a joint call. On that call, the client calmly reiterated that I had closed the deal. They even recounted specific meetings where my boss wasn't present. Compliance asked a single question. "Can you confirm that user's name was your main point of contact from start to finish?" The client didn't hesitate. Absolutely. And in that silence afterward, I swear I could hear the foundation cracking under my boss's entire scheme. By the end of the week, the story wasn't an employee with performance issues. It was an executive caught manipulating records. And for the first time since this started, the quiet firing machine wasn't aimed at me anymore. It was turning inward, chewing on the very person who set it in motion. I hadn't won yet, but the balance of power had shifted. And now, it wasn't just me versus him. It was him versus the truth. If part 5 was the tremor, part 6 was the earthquake. Once compliance and the clients were aligned, the story stopped being internal politics and started being a full-scale investigation. And the louder the truth got, the faster my boss's mask began to slip. The first sign came Monday morning. A new calendar invite appeared. Compensation Committee, special session. Not just my name, not just HR. It included my boss, compliance, finance, and, most importantly, the VP of sales. If you've ever been in sales, you know the VP isn't wasting an hour on a minor HR squabble. When they show up, it means blood is in the water. The session itself was brutal. Compliance led with a slideshow of evidence. Audit logs showing the ownership change. Screenshots from my exports proving the deal had been mine. The client's formal letter praising me by name. And then the kicker. Metadata from the CRM system showing the edits were made under the analyst's account at an impossible time. 11:42 p.m. on a Sunday, followed by the analyst's signed statement saying he hadn't touched the deal. They didn't accuse my boss directly, but the implication was clear. There was only one person with both the motive and the authority to pull those strings. When it was my turn, I didn't rant. I didn't throw punches. I just calmly walked through my timeline. Flights, meetings, emails, Teams, calls. I even pulled up a recording where the Zenith CFO literally said, "Thanks again for your persistence on this deal." I let the silence hang after that one. My boss, on the other hand, wasn't calm. He interrupted. He raised his voice. At one point, he even tried to claim that he had strategically guided me on the deal, that his executive oversight was why Zenith signed it all. But the VP cut him off cold. If that's the case, why did the client specifically state they've never interacted with you? I swear, watching his face in that moment was better than any commission check. By the end of the session, the committee announced they were freezing all payouts related to Zenith until a full audit could be completed, which meant my $100,000 wasn't gone. It was sitting in limbo, safe, waiting. But the fallout didn't stop there. Word spread fast inside the company. You can't have an executive under investigation without whispers flying down every hallway. Analysts started sharing stories of weird requests my boss had made in the past. Another sales rep quietly told me he'd lost a smaller deal months earlier in a mysterious reassignment. Suddenly, this wasn't just about me. It was about a pattern. HR, meanwhile, tried to distance themselves. Remember those fake performance notes they had planted in my file? Gone. Magically scrubbed. I pulled my own HRIS record, and the entries had vanished, replaced with vague boilerplate like employee met expectations. It was almost funny. Proof they'd been complicit. Now panicking to cover their tracks. My boss, though, he wasn't laughing anymore. He stopped strutting past my desk, stopped sending smug one-liners. Instead, I'd catch glimpses of him in his office, pacing with the blinds half closed, snapping at assistants, whispering into the phone like a man negotiating for his life. And then came the final crack in the mask. During a follow-up session, compliance presented an internal Teams chat log. It was between my boss and the analyst whose login had been used, and in black and white it read, "Boss, need you to adjust attribution on Zenith. Just a quick fix. Analyst, this doesn't look right. Boss, don't worry, I'll take care of the narrative." The room went silent. You could feel the temperature drop. Even HR looked like they wanted to crawl under the table. The VP leaned back, steepled his fingers, and said quietly, "We'll be escalating this to the board." And in that moment, my boss's face drained of color. For months, he'd walked around untouchable, the kind of executive who thought the rules didn't apply to him. But now, he looked like exactly what he was, a cornered man watching the walls close in. The irony is, I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. Because my $100,000 was still in limbo. My career was still at risk, and I knew desperate men do desperate things. But one thing was certain. The quiet firing had officially backfired. The company wasn't whispering about me anymore. They were whispering about him. And the louder those whispers got, the more certain I became of one thing. This wasn't going to end with a handshake. It was going to end with a reckoning. If Part 6 was the earthquake, Part 7 was the aftershock that leveled the house. My boss still thought he had wriggle room, some executive shield that would protect him if he spun hard enough. But arrogance leaves fingerprints, and I had them all. The first was buried in the CRM itself. When you make changes in the system, the front-end log can be cleaned, but the back-end metadata is a different beast. Every edit leaves a trace. IP address, device ID, and login timestamps. I had quietly asked a friend in IT, not officially, just a coffee break chat, if system logs ever overwrite themselves. He chuckled and said, "Not unless someone manually nukes the server. Even then, backups live for months." That was all I needed to hear. So I requested a full metadata export through compliance. It took 3 days, but when the file landed in my inbox, I almost laughed out loud. There it was, in black and white. Login, boss's credentials. Device, his company-issued laptop. Timestamp, 11:42 p.m., Sunday night. Action, deal owner changed from my name, boss's name. It wasn't the analyst's account. It wasn't some system error. It was him, personally, with his machine, his IP address, his hands on the keyboard. The second was the client. I'd already had their letter, but I knew the board would want something airtight, something corporate lawyers couldn't twist into misinterpretation. So I asked Zenith's CFO carefully if they'd be willing to provide a formal statement addressed directly to compliance. Not just a thank you note, a legal-style attestation. They agreed. Within 24 hours, compliance received a signed letter on Zenith's letterhead. We confirm my name was our primary point of contact for all negotiations and contract execution. We have had no direct interactions with boss's name regarding this deal. That wasn't just praise. That was evidence. The third piece was the NDA. Remember the thick packet they'd tried to shove at me in Part 4? I had quietly sent it to an employment lawyer. His official opinion letter came back sharp as a blade. This NDA is overly broad, likely unenforceable, and appears designed to suppress claims of wage theft. Signing would not be in your interest. I forwarded that opinion straight to compliance. By the time the board convened, the case wasn't employee versus executive. It was fraud, policy violation, and reputational risk. My boss walked into that room thinking he could charm his way out. He walked out looking like a man who'd seen a ghost. I wasn't in the room when the hammer dropped, but I didn't need to be. I heard it in the aftermath. Whispers in the hallway, Slack messages from colleagues, a sudden calendar block titled Leadership Transition Plan. My boss's name was gone from the org chart by Friday afternoon. Officially, they called it a mutual separation to pursue new opportunities. Unofficially, everyone knew the truth. But the real moment for me came one-on-one. 2 days after the board meeting, the VP of sales pulled me into his office. He didn't sugarcoat it. "You blew this open," he said flatly. "We're recalculating your commission plus interest. Expect the payout next cycle." I nodded, trying to stay professional. But when I left his office, I sat in my car and just breathed. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for the next knife in the back. I wasn't bracing for another quick sink ambush. I'd won. Not with shouting, not with theatrics, with receipts, with patience, with the kind of persistence that closes multi-million-dollar deals and takes down corrupt executives. And my boss? The man who thought he could steal 100,000 and erase me with a signature? He'd been erased instead. But the story wasn't over yet, because when the dust settled, the company still owed me something bigger than money, accountability. And I wasn't about to let them off easy. If Part 7 was the kill shot, Part 8 was the aftermath, the part where the smoke clears and you see who's still standing. Spoiler, it wasn't him. The payout hit first. Exactly 2 weeks after the board session, I logged into my payroll portal, and there it was, a $100,000 commission. Not pending, not frozen, paid. And right beneath it, an additional line item labeled interest adjustment plus retention bonus. That extra chunk wasn't charity, it was insurance. The company's way of saying, please don't walk away, please don't sue us. Then came the apology. Official, stamped with company letterhead, signed by the VP of Sales and Compliance. We regret the oversight. We acknowledge your contribution to the Zenith deal. Steps are being taken to ensure this does not recur. Corporate speak, sure. But reading it felt like watching the scales balance after months of being tilted against me. But I didn't stop there. I wasn't just fighting for my money. I was fighting to make sure no one else went through this circus again. So when they offered me a leadership development track as a peace offering, I pushed back. Hard. I gave them 3 conditions. 1. Transparent logs. No more single admin privileges in the CRM. Every edit had to leave a verifiable trail, with dual authentication for ownership changes. 2. Commission SLA. All payouts had to be confirmed in writing within 5 business days of a closed deal. No exceptions. No executive reassignments. 3. Compliance oversight. Any attempt to override policy had to be reviewed by compliance before execution, not after someone blew the whistle. I laid it out cold. You want me to stay? These aren't requests. They're requirements. To my surprise, they agreed. Not because they wanted to, because they had to. The board had seen the mess. Clients had seen the mess. They couldn't afford another scandal. And my boss? The man who tried to make me vanish? His ending was quieter than mine, but far crueler. On LinkedIn, his title changed from VP of Sales to Independent Consultant. His connections thinned out. Recruiters stopped calling. Word travels fast in our industry, and nobody wants a leader with compliance investigation whispering behind his name. The cherry on top? A month later, someone forwarded me a news snippet from an industry site. Another company had been reviewing leadership hires after discovering inconsistencies in prior employment records. Translation: his reputation had followed him, and doors were slamming shut. He'd stolen my commission thinking it would disappear into his bank account without a trace. Instead, the trace, the digital fingerprints, the client letters, the audit logs, became the rope that dragged him down. And me? I didn't walk away with just $100,000. I walked away with proof that sometimes, in a system built to protect the powerful, persistence and receipts can tip the balance. No shouting, no storming out. Just patience, evidence, and a refusal to roll over. That's how you beat a boss who thinks he's untouchable. And that's how karma cashes a check you didn't even know you were owed.